Hey guys, Nickel Block Forecasting, giving you guys a quick update on what's happening in the tropics. There's kind of a lot going on, and so I thought I'd do a quick primer for you guys. I got my mouse on here for you. A quick run through for you guys on kind of everything that's going down and how it may or may not impact you directly. We'll be talking about everything in the Atlantic as well as a breakdown of what's happening with Hurricane Hilary. Chances are this video isn't going to answer the question, how much rain will fall at my house? But hopefully this will give you kind of a better idea about what to anticipate from the forecast moving forward, as well as what that forecast is actually going to be. So we do have an app, and I've been talking about this a lot lately because a lot of people have asking, oh, I didn't even know you had an app. And yeah, you can download it for Android, you can download it for, there we go, for your Apple device too. It doesn't matter what you got, we got an app for you. So here's what's happening in the tropics on the Atlantic side. On the left here, showing 4 areas of potential development. This does include one that may sneak into the Gulf, a second one that may also get close to the Gulf of Mexico, depending on how kind of things shake out. A third area that is going to miss the Gulf completely, and a fourth area that is definitely going to miss the Gulf of Mexico. The 3 areas out in the open Atlantic, one of them may bother the eastern seaboard, though we're not going to have a chance to talk about the eastern seaboard in this video directly, because I think the chance right now is pretty low. The second one that's out there, the orange guy that's on there, may also have a chance to maybe clip Bermuda, though even that chance is pretty low, so I'm probably not going to get into it during this video, and the red guy is going to stay out to sea. The one thing that isn't going to impact U.S. soil is Hurricane Hilary there on the right-hand side. You can see the forecast cone as of this recording. The latest coming in at 3 o'clock Mountain Time, showing the forecast cone there, taking it kind of just up the west side of the spine of the Baja and then making landfall either along the Baja or the Southern California coast, ripping across parts of Nevada and then into parts of Oregon and Idaho as a non-tropical depression. So it's just kind of a remnant low. So we'll start things off with the Atlantic Basin because I know that's where most of you guys tend to live. And yeah, we've got probably 5 areas to watch. We had those 4 areas we were talking about a couple of seconds ago from the National Hurricane Center map. A 5th area is the wave that's just coming off the coast of Africa. The first place we're going to talk about is Invest 99L and Invest 98L first. This is going to be the one that's farthest off to the east, and this is the one that's probably not going to bother anybody. I will note that things are a little more uncertain in terms of its trajectory over the next about 48 to 60 to maybe even getting close to 72 hours. But that just has to do with how fast is it going to zip north and kind of northwest before it turns north and kind of spins back around to the northeast. Again, staying out to sea. This one shouldn't bother anybody. 99L is the orange one that was a little bit closer. And what I want to highlight with this is the fact, yes, it's out in the open Atlantic. However, the reason that I tend to think that we'll probably see something out of this is all of the lines on here from our ship's guidance that we need to be going up are in fact going up. All of the lines that we need to go down are in fact going down. So on this top guy here, this is just the forecast for the max wind speed that's on the way up. But more importantly, your potential intensity maxima is also going up. Your wind shear is going down. Sea surface temperature is going up. The humidity within the mid-levels of the atmosphere also going up. And your heat content in the ocean, a little mixed, but generally it's moving up. Because of that, that means that not only is it moving into a more favorable atmospheric environment, but it's also moving into a more favorable oceanic environment. So we're feeding it better food, and then we're giving it a better place to live. I think all of us, whether you're a hurricane or a human, would probably benefit from having a good place to live and having plenty of food to eat. The one that probably has the most attention from most people that are probably watching this video, so I'm not really going to bury the lead here necessarily, is the thing that may or may not be getting into the Gulf of Mexico as we head through the next couple of days. Now this is going to be a two-pronger. It's going to be one little piece that sneaks into the Gulf from near Florida, and another little piece that sneaks into the Gulf from the Caribbean. The stuff from Florida is just going to be showers and thunderstorms along the tail end of a front. You may get some low-level kind of attempted organization of low pressure from that, strictly from the showers and thunderstorms that develop very quickly. If we have some kind of a burst overnight, big latent heat release or something like that, that may lower the pressure down at the surface, and you may get a very weak sauce area of low-level low pressure. The place, or the stuff that's coming from the Caribbean and getting into place into the Gulf of Mexico, is going to be more of a mid-level area of low pressure. So if we can stack the low-level area of low pressure, even if it's weak sauce, with the mid-level area of low pressure, that's going to go a long way toward this becoming a thing rather than just being a thing, if that kind of makes sense. And the general idea with this is that it's going to track off to the west across the Gulf of Mexico and toward either Mexico itself or toward southern Texas. This would be south of Houston, most likely. And you may be asking the question, yeah, well, Nick, how come this thing won't just zoom north and go right toward New Orleans, Mobile, Tallahassee, or Tampa, right? Like, why isn't this thing just going to zip north? We've seen it happen before. I know a lot of you that watch this thing are probably thinking and reminding yourselves of Hurricane Katrina. Well, that crossed over Florida, and it pulled a U-turn and went right toward Mississippi, Nick. So I think every storm is going to do that. Thankfully, that's not really in the cards this go-around for a couple of different reasons. So I want to help you guys rest a little bit easier here. The guy on the left here, the graphic on the left here, is just that same map, right? Same map. But what I've done is I've drawn on a couple of things here. That red dashed area is the axis along the little frontal boundary that pushed through the area. So from that axis, the wind on each side of that is going in opposite directions. That axis itself is moving. That's the white arrows there, off to the east, and it's pushing this. So this arrow is all the air and all the wind that wants to push everything off to the east, and this arrow is everything that wants to push off to the west, and the axis is right here. So as this moves off to the east, this black line, this black arrow here, is going to grow with it off to the east as well, which means anything that gets into the Gulf is going to want to move back to the west. The graphic on the right-hand side here shows that pretty well. Big ridge of high pressure. This is the thing. This is the reason it has been so hot across parts of the south and southeast lately. This big ridge, and now into parts of the plains and Midwest too. The Ohio River Valley, everybody's baking from this thing. Bacon. I know you were thinking it too. This is really going to press the winds across the Gulf of Mexico from east to west. So anything that may be down here is going to have more of a tendency to move off to the west and toward Mexico and southern Texas. I will also mention that this steering flow that we see here, as well as a little bit of the shear that's going to be in place, given the fact that we're going to have a little bit of wind aloft that's moving from east to west, as well as some wind aloft that's already in place moving from, that would be southeast to northwest, you're going to end up with a little bit of shear here because down at the surface, the wind is moving in a different direction. So this is not going to have a very easy life in the Gulf of Mexico trying to get organized, despite the fact that the Gulf of Mexico is very, 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 very warm. I may not have had enough varies there. Very warm. And so it wouldn't take much for something to develop if it had a chance to develop. This thing just probably won't have a chance to develop. As we look out past about day 7 or so into the open Atlantic for like kind of everything else, it looks like we may have yet another area of low pressure trying to get better organized in the Gulf of Mexico and perhaps in the Bay of Campeche. And then we've got an area of lower pressure shown across parts of the open Atlantic as well, and then out toward the Azores. But generally, that ridge of high pressure should still be in place, blocking anything from trying to make it to, probably most of the Texas coastline, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, at least on the Gulf side. And then the flow off of that and the troughing along the East Coast should capture and keep anything that is out there mainly out to sea. So So far, over the next about 5 to 10 days, despite all the activity that's out there, the atmospheric puzzle pieces that are in place that you see on here would suggest that we're going to keep everything that's out there, except for the couple of areas that may get into the Gulf of Mexico, and those would be mainly disorganized given the wind shear in place and the quick timeline for traversing the Gulf of Mexico. It just won't give it enough time to do anything. But it would also be more of a concern likely for parts of Mexico or extreme southern Texas in places that frankly probably need a little bit of rain and would benefit from some of that rain, hopefully not too much, but some of that rain and hopefully not too much happening all at once. So now let's talk about Hurricane Hilary over in the Pacific, mainly because this is going to impact the United States. Here's the latest track on the left from the National Hurricane Center. Big shout out to Polar Weather and Tomer Berg for these awesome maps. You can see how this is tracking off to kind of the northwest, and it's starting to make its more northerly turn right now. And the forecast map on the right here showing that once it does make that northerly turn, it is going to move kind of north-northwest toward the Baja and eventually toward California as we move through the next 24, 36, 48, 60, and 72 hours. So we are 3 days away from this thing being north of LA in California. What's kind of the deal with Hilary in terms of the forecast? There are probably 4, maybe 5 things, we're only going to go over 4, that are going to be impacting this forecast, and why, if you're living in Southern California, if you're living in Nevada, if you're living in Arizona, you probably need to pay close attention to the forecast, number one, because obviously rain, wind. But number two, there's going to be some shimmying in here with this forecast, and it may have drastic changes on the impacts that you, if you're living across parts of California, Nevada, or Arizona, may eventually have to deal with from this. So the first one up is the Baja of California. And Kim Wood, who's a fantastic researcher out in Arizona, great meteorologist, and I will say, a dear friend of mine, did point out that the Baja of California is basically a mountain range over water. And so what you end up with is something called lee cyclogenesis, when you get wind that goes across a mountain range. So it goes up the side of the mountain, and then as it takes off from the top of that mountain and maybe sneaks down the other side, the air naturally starts to rotate. This happens all the time. In fact, if you've ever wondered why there's always severe weather across parts of the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles and parts of Kansas late in the spring and early in the summer, this is why. You get a lee trough and lee cyclogenesis off the backside of the Rocky Mountains as the wind traverses those mountains. So, as Hilary is going to be moving up the coast of the Baja, at first you're going to have that upper right image, which is a northeast wind, lee cyclogenesis on the west side. Then you're going to have a southeast wind, still going lee cyclogenesis on the west side. Then, as it passes, you're going to get a southwest wind. Now you're creating lee cyclogenesis on the east side of the Baja of California. So if I'm a mountaintop right here, so the lee cyclogenesis on the west side here, I guess that would be, that'd be the west side for you guys. No, that's the east side for you guys. Anyway, lee cyclogenesis on the west side of your little Baja here is going to tend to tug a little bit at the area of low pressure that is the center of Hilary. It's not going to do a big tug, but it'll do a little tug. Then, when it's on the other side, it'll still do a little tug at the center of Hilary. As Hurricane Hilary is moving up the Baja, that means that as it's moving, it's gonna tend to get tugged one way or pushed another way due to the Fujiwara effect, where you get deflection a little bit before you get rotation. So it deflects a little bit and you end up doing this little jig between the two areas of low pressure. Because of that, the forecast is likely, if we're just looking at this in a bubble, is going to wiggle Hilary as it moves northward. Now, all hurricanes tend to wiggle a little bit as they travel, but we're probably going to get a little bit of an exaggerated wiggle from Hilary due to this. It may also undecouple that mid-level area of low pressure from the low-level area of low pressure. The same thing that we were talking about in the Gulf of Mexico applies in the Pacific as well. And unless those things are stacked, you're probably not going to have a very well-organized system. And if we're tugging at the low-level center of Hilary, that may decouple these two, and then that may rip the system apart. Not completely, but enough to start to weaken it as it moves off to the north. The second thing is that area of low pressure that is off the coast of California. You are going to tend to get a little bit of deflection off of here. And I showed the deflection. This is your initial deflection. Now, eventually, these would rotate back around each other. But the initial nudge from each other would be one deflecting one way, one deflecting another before they start to do their little jig with each other. So you'd get pressed into the Baja of California before getting pulled back to the west and across parts of, let's say, California and Nevada, depending on the location of that area of low pressure that's just off the coast of California. That little dance that they do, so not only are we now wiggling because we're moving up the Baja and trying to maybe decouple a little bit, but now we're also doing a little dance in the mid and maybe lower levels. Not probably as much in the lower levels, but in the mid levels, you're doing your little dance, your little Fujiwara dance out there with your area of low pressure off the west coast. Then on top of that, you have the ridge to the east, which is going to be pushing Hilary a little farther off to the west, because that ridge is really stout across parts of the plains. We're talking about a ridge that's been in place and kind of reorganized itself, what feels like nearly all summer long, is still doing a good number at keeping not only stuff away in the Gulf of Mexico, but it's also doing a good number at kind of pushing stuff away as you look into the Pacific as well. So we're wiggling up the coast. We may see a little bit of decoupling. We're doing a little dance in the mid-levels, and now the whole thing is getting shoved off to the west. So at first we're getting shoved to the east. Now we're getting shoved back to the west. So you can see how Hurricane Hilary is going to have a very difficult life as it tries to traverse its way off to the north. And then on top of that, you're going to have the eventual interaction with an area of low pressure well off to the north. This one doesn't matter quite as much in terms of how it's going to impact California, Nevada, or Arizona, but mainly how it may eventually impact eastern Oregon, parts of Idaho, maybe even eastern Washington. And also your sea surface temperatures are going to be dropping off, but we'll talk more about that on this slide, which shows you how the ensembles are trying to handle how Hilary is going to be moving off to the north. You can see that the ensembles are taking this thing a whole lot closer to the Baja of California. Again, it's the wiggle, it's the decoupling, it's the little deflection dance, and perhaps not seeing as much of that shoving from the ridge of high pressure. The other thing worth noting on here is this ship's forecast data showing everything on the other guy. Remember that was going up that needed to go up and went down that needed to go down? Converse here. Everything that's going up is going down, and everything that needs to go down is actually going up. So we're losing our max potential wind. We're losing our max wind speed. What is going up is the wind shear. What is going down is the sea surface temperature. What is going down is the relative humidity within the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And what is absolutely tanking is the max heat content of the ocean. Because of that, you are seeing a model forecast that is just a ski slope for Hilary. I mean, a pretty good ski slope too, where you're going from being a Category 4 hurricane to perhaps just a tropical storm in as little as 48 hours from now. And I would argue that there may even be some added potential to be even lower than this, depending on the interaction with the Baja, the little dance, the deflection, all of this. The ensemble forecast here, you can kind of see where it's going to be over the next little bit. There's not a lot of uncertainty here and pretty high confidence over the next 60 hours about the trek. But then after that point, things do get a little more questionable within the ensemble guidance here. I will note that even though there is high confidence in here about the general track, I think the specific track it has very low confidence based on the things that I was talking about. Because of that, because the specific track has a lower confidence, I think that there is a higher uncertainty about the overall strength of Hilary as the system gets closer to California. Here, really quickly, is the earliest reasonable onset of tropical storm force wind, not hurricane wind, tropical storm force wind, which would be about 40 miles an hour. And you can see we're talking about Sunday morning. The most likely arrival time around Sunday night for parts of Southern California. The hurricane force wind ends, according to the National Hurricane Center, about a quarter of the way down the Baja. Instead, what this ends up being, and not necessarily, come on, play this for you guys, a wind event where model guidance currently showing wind gusts between about 30 and 50 miles an hour for parts of Southern California, Nevada, and western Arizona, but rather a rain event for the area where 2 to 4 inches of rain across much of the area does look likely at this point, with some areas picking up between maybe 6 to 10 inches of rain. These are going to be the higher elevations. But then we have to worry about the potential for maybe some mudslides in areas, as well as flooding in the places that maybe haven't had rain in a long time up until this year. Picked up a lot of rain this year, and now we are adding to the already extra rain than we're accustomed to for the last handful of years. A high risk of flash flooding across parts of Southern California, and the WPC does not take these high risks lightly. They tend to issue these, and bad things tend to happen with relation to flooding. This isn't a situation where you'd think like, oh, well, a tornado watch, there's not always a tornado near me. When they issue these high risks for flash flooding, I forget the specific statistic, but in many cases, bad things tend, unfortunately, to happen. So that's kind of a rundown of what to expect from the tropics as we head through the next handful of days. Hopefully this gives you guys a walkthrough. I apologize for being so long-winded, but there was a lot of stuff to go over. If you do have any questions, you guys know where to find me on Twitter and Facebook. And of course, you can always download the Nickel Block Forecasting app. That's really easy to do. And by the way, that's the name. That's the logo. We'll see you guys around.